Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we spend the next 5 days contemplating Compassion 2.0, how do we, in a very topsy-turvy, conflicted world, continue to flourish as individuals, as communities, as a world? It's not so easy. I read today that the month of June just passed, and July are on track to be the hottest months on record, which will make it nearly a year for world record-breaking temperatures on our planet Earth. We are now consistently above the 1.5 degrees centigrade, above pre-industrial levels, which is the milestone for when climate change basically spins out of control. It's a worthy question. What is compassion in a time of runaway climate change? We're also looking at, genocide in Gaza by the Israelis against the Palestinians, and it's a worthy question. What does compassion mean in a time of genocide? What does one do? How does one react to the carnage that we're seeing in Gaza on the daily news? We read reports that everywhere in the world, people are stressed out. All kinds of indicators from rising drug addiction, alcoholism, self-harm, anxieties, depressions are on the rise. How do we understand compassion in a world where stresses are now off the charts and particularly afflicting our young people? Our world today is in conflict with itself. Humanity's in conflict with itself. Humanity's in conflict with the environment. And these eternal verities around love and justice, harmony, compassion, empathy are being tested in ways that are unprecedented because the ecology itself is breaking apart. Human relations are in extremis. Technology is spinning out of control. What is compassion in a world of AI? How do we empathize with the machines that now have outstripped human intelligence and are communicating with themselves and by themselves in languages that humanity can no longer understand? How do we love our machines in a time of AI? So when we think of compassion 2.0, sometimes it's easy to be almost flippant about it. Oh yeah, compassion. We're all supposed to be better people. We're all supposed to flourish. But the context within which these discussions are taking place have moved beyond normal reckoning. And therefore, the discussion that we're going to have this week of how do we, at this moment, act more compassionately in a 2.0 version of compassion is one of the most important and urgent questions of our time, because unless and until we can keep up our interior growth and development, at least proportional to the centrifugal force of chaos swirling around us all the time and at multiple levels, we won't keep pace with what we need to transform into a more harmonious world. So I deeply appreciate the opportunity this week on Humanity Rising to explore these very deep issues. And I'm particularly grateful that this conversation is being convened by two colleagues who've been on Humanity Rising before, Tom Eddington and Carson Kelly. So I want to bring Tom on. He needs no introduction. You know him very well. And he consistently brings these kinds of topics and this kind of, I would say, moral maturity to these discussions. So, Tom, I want to thank you for everything that you've done for Humanity Rising and turn the program over to you and Carson. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And as always, thanks for your opening comments. For me, as I was listening to you and as Carson and I were putting the week together, it's just a good reminder that, it's so easy for us as human beings to think from a dualistic way. And, what compassion invites us to do and the world events invite us to do is to think non-dualistically. And I think that's the challenge we have, is to hold all of these truths, all of these things simultaneously and not be looking through the lens of right or wrong, good or bad. And that's hard. It's challenging. And that's one of the values of compassion is it allows us to be able to see things as that's bad behavior, but not a bad human being. That is something that in this moment may feel like it's a problem. And yet in 5 years, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, we can see the value in what happened. And even looking at the world events, over the last couple of decades, the world has lost 40 democracies. And with the rise of Viktor Orban in Hungary and other autocratic leaders, we can look at it and say, humanity is spiraling out of control. And yet we look at the elections in the UK and in France this last weekend, where the progressive, the liberal, the parties that represent the best of humanity in terms of their attitudes, their policies around the environment, around financial services, climate change, et cetera, have prevailed. And so I think, the hard part about the state of the world is we don't have insight into the long arc of the evolution of the human species.
Good point.
And that makes it challenging. And so, I'm particularly excited to be doing this week with Carson and the authors that we have joining us, because they help in their writing and in their research and their work. They help us see the opportunities and the core nature of humanity. We are hardwired for collaboration and cooperation. Compassion is part of innately who we are. And so excited to, Carson, bring you into the conversation and have you introduce Scott and get on with the day. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to see any of the prior shows that Carson and I've had a chance to do together, Carson's the founder of Compassion 2.0 and is doing some extraordinary work in creating not only the thought process and the thinking with a number of academics around the world, but actually working to bring flourishing into organizations and into society. So welcome, Carson. Looking forward to today's conversation and the week. We can't hear you, Carson.
Sorry about that. Thanks. Can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. And I'd also like to thank Jim, too, and the team at Humanity Rising for inviting us on to the podcast to share the work of Compassion 2.0 and extended friends and community members. Really appreciate the opportunity to bring forward these colleagues. They're all doing incredible work and doing so in service to a more compassionate and flourishing world. Tom gave introduction to me about Compassion 2.0. I will just add one element for those listeners that aren't familiar. The community is an extended group of friends and what we call guild members that range from organizational developers and leaders, product developers, neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, coaches, people professionals, UX, UI designers, entrepreneurs, VCs, and more. You can learn more about us at compassion2.com. We're about to announce our fall lineup of events, which includes Compassion Plus Product, Flourishing plus Psychedelics and the Inner Development Goals San Francisco Bay Area Summit. And we will also actually be going to Berlin as well in October to meet with our colleagues and friends in Europe. So with that, I'd like to turn my attention and bring Scott Shute on to the show. Scott, it's great to see you. Scott he'll give a whole background about, who he is and what he's been doing. But Scott was really paramount in my journey in getting involved in compassion as a professional frame. I went to a LinkedIn conference that when he was at LinkedIn, he created a conference around, I can't remember the title of it, but it was around compassion and mindfulness and leadership. And it was truly eye-opening and amazing. And then I had the good fortune to also meet with Scott and get to know him a bit and learn more about his career at that time. But it was a very timely part of my, spiritual / work realization, I guess. And I'm forever grateful for that. So Scott was very, very helpful. So with that, Scott, welcome. Thank you for being here. And why don't we jump on in? And I think maybe the best place to start is maybe pick up where I just kind of put us. Tell us about maybe just who you are, your background, time at LinkedIn, anything you'd like to share, and then we'll dive further into the books.
Sure. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. A little background on me. So I have kind of two parts. One is I've had a career as an executive. I was at LinkedIn. I was the VP of Global Customer Operations here in Silicon Valley. I'm in San Jose, California. I had a big team of 1,000 people. It was one of those 24/7 type of jobs. And the other part of me is I've had a spiritual practice since I was 13. I've been leading meditation or contemplation since I was in college. I'm a member of the clergy. It's a huge part of my life. And I never talked about that part of me at work until I got to LinkedIn and found that it was a very open place. Our CEO was talking about compassion. He was talking about his own practice. And I decided to bring that part of me to work. It started just by leading one meditation session. And that first time there was one other person there. And I'm sure that guy was just as terrified as I was. I never saw him again. But the next week there were 3 and 5, and then it just continued. And I became a volunteer. I raised my hand to be the executive sponsor of our mindfulness program. And with a bunch of other volunteers, we created a program. And then after about 3 or 4 years of volunteering, I saw an opening. Our CEO had been he had given the commencement address at Wharton and talked about compassion. And I thought that was a very brave thing to do, because he'd been talking about compassion in friendly events like Wisdom 2.0. But here he was at Wharton, and then the next day he's on Good Morning America, and this is all they want to talk about is compassion in leadership, because it was so unique at the time. And when he came home, I approached him and I said, "Hey, you just told every single employee at LinkedIn that compassion was the most important thing they could do, and we're not really doing anything about it." And so I made the pitch, and I created my own role. I was the head of mindfulness and compassion programs at LinkedIn, where my mission, and it remains, is to change work from the inside out by mainstreaming mindfulness and operationalizing compassion. And so I did that for 3 years, and then I left LinkedIn about 3 years ago, and now I'm out in the world trying to help other leaders and organizations become more compassionate, more mindful.
That's fantastic. And, just kind of picking up on that thread, since you've left LinkedIn, well, I should say, tell us what you've been doing. And then also more broadly, what are you seeing out there?
Sure. I started, I wrote my book, which came out during COVID time. It's called The Full Body Yes. And it's a sneaky spiritual book, right? It was designed to get middle-aged white dudes to read something that generally, would be on the Oprah list or Brene Brown or whatever. And so I started doing speaking and coaching and consulting. But my mission is true. It's to change work from the inside out. And I mean that in its biggest form. 3.3 billion of us in the workplace. And realized pretty quickly, this is not going to happen with just what I'm doing. And so created a community. It's called Changing Work. You can find us at changingwork.org. And we started with practitioners, people who are coaches and consultants, and really kind of banding together to make each one of us more successful. with the idea that if we can help the people who are doing the work, then it creates a network effect and helps create bigger change. And now we're opening that up. We're in the beginning stages of opening it up to community of leaders, community of employees, later of students, and really trying to create a movement around changing work in a conscious way. And we're right at this precipice of like, okay, is this going to work or not? But we're doing some fun things. So as an example, it's truly a collective. So instead of, hey, this is all about Scott and what Scott's doing, no, this is about us. This is about the we, moving from me to we. So one of our first projects together is we're writing a book. It's coming out September 20th. It's called The Self-Aware Leader. And the idea is that 25 people each write a chapter about their own awakening, their own self-awareness, something that they've learned. And I really like this a lot. One of our community members reached out and he said, oh, this is what the Quakers do. And I said, what? I don't know much about the Quakers. And so tell me more. He said, well, the Quakers have a relationship with the divine that is much more of a question than an answer. And so part of what they do is they write together. They'll write books together as a way of deepening their own individual understanding of the divine, their collective understanding of the divine. And then they'll use that book as a conversation starter among their community, but also use it as a conversation starter with the outside world or the outside community. And I said, this is exactly what we're doing, right? So for me, when we talk about conscious leadership, when we talk about self-awareness, we're, it's under code, but really what I'm talking about is our relationship of the divine, right? In the business world. And of course we don't have all the answers. We have lots of questions. It's a journey, not a destination. So I love what we've started, and I'm reminded of my favorite Rumi quote. He said, yesterday I was clever and I tried to change the world, but today I'm wise and I'm working on changing myself. And that I hold both of those spaces, right? As Jim was talking in the beginning, we have all this stuff going on in the world, and it's tempting to want to throw my shoulder behind the wheel of one of those things, of climate change, of politics, of mental health, whatever it is. But I've chosen consciousness to put my time towards, with the belief that if we change consciousness, then all the other things go better, right? As each leader becomes more conscious, they make different choices in the world. As each person becomes more conscious, they make different choices in the world. And so hopefully together, this call, this organization, all our organizations together can move the ball forward a little bit in that space. And we can all develop ourselves.
Beautiful. Lots of things. So Tom, I know Tom. I know Tom has probably like 7 questions, but I'm going to just be indulgent for a moment. Unpack what changing work from the inside out means. You've spoken to about what you just said was, people's relationship to the divine. That could be seen as loaded. It could not be, depending on who you're who you're talking to. I've read your book. I've had the opportunity to talk with you, over the years. So I have a sense of how that shows up for you, but curious to know more broadly about changing work from the inside out within the collective. I would imagine there'd be just as many perspectives on that as there are people in the collective. So can you unpack that a little bit? What does that look like? I mean, for you specifically, if you could wave a wand and all of a sudden work was changed and it was coming from the inside out versus what you might be seeing generally, say what the collective as a group is generally speaking to.
Sure. So for me, everything I talk about at work, I talk about in a secular way. I'm a business guy too. I want to talk about ROI. I want to talk about success of the business. The business is there for a certain set of reasons. I want to meet people where they are. Right. So if somebody invites me to be a speaker or consultant, I'm never going to embarrass them and show up in white robes and crystals. And, I need to meet them where they are. So, but what I mean and how we talk about in like, what's the value proposition of compassion at work or changing work from the inside out? So when I think about compassion, well, in its simplest form, a business, a conscious business is one that's moving from me to we. Right. So instead of just thinking about shareholders and just thinking about we're in business to make money, A conscious business is thinking about all of its stakeholders. Yes, we need to make money. Those investors gave us money. We need to protect that. That's part of our job, right? And we want to create a great environment for our employees where they feel psychologically safe, where they can do their best work, where they can be creative, right? So we're creating a great environment for our employees. We're creating a great value set for our customers. That's why they're there. So we want to help our customers. And then more broadly, we're at least not making things worse, but hopefully thinking about things for the better in our broader community, both the local and globally. So we're moving from me to we. And we have a set of practices at each level, at the individual level, at the management level, at the corporate level, that get us to that point. So that's how I define it. I'll go one click further in how I define compassion, because I use this as a model to teach to. There's a lot of great definitions. This is mine. Developed with Lori Schwanbeck, who is my partner at LinkedIn, helping build some of these things. We talk about compassion as first capacity, because our capacity for things, our capacity for compassion ebbs and flows minute by minute, second by second. Capacity for three things. First, it's the awareness of others. The second is a mindset of kindness towards others. If you went, behind other doors, I might say a mindset of love towards others. And the third is the courage to take action. So once I am aware of something and I have a mindset of wanting to make things better, then do I have the courage to do something? So that's compassion. Now, how we think about it in the collective is a broad strokes. When I very first started the community, we started with conscious business at the very center point. And I wanted it to be, pure is not quite the right word, but you know what I mean. Like, it's really about conscious business and consciousness. And then as we started attracting people, on the other side, we have this idea that we want it to be for everyone, right? For the 3.3 billion people in the world. And people would come in with their own ideas. They wanted to talk about the environment or ERG or their specific outer way that this shows up. And at first I was a little resistant. I'm like, no, this is not about the environment. This is about consciousness, or this is not about whatever. And what I realized is that consciousness is a spectrum. And if we really want to change it at a broad level, then we meet people where they are, wherever they are. And so who am I to say what it is and what it isn't? And so we've moved to a place where, at least currently, how I think about it is, in its broadest ways, this me to we movement at work. If we're talking about work, right? Changing work. Because another discussion we have is how work is the new religion. But we're changing work. We meet people where they are, and the tent is as big as we can get it, right?
Cool. So I'm sorry, I was just taking a note.
Yeah.
So work is the new religion. Let's just take a minute and unpack that for a minute.
So, yeah, let's do that. So I think that work, big companies and work and the amount of time we spend at work is changing consciousness in ways that religions and governments have been doing for thousands of years. Here's what I mean. If you join a big company like Microsoft or Google or Caterpillar or whoever, you have to fit in to the way things that are done, or you're not going to survive there. Meaning you're going to self-select out because it's just too irritating, or they're going to self-select you out because you're too irritating. You have to fit in. And what that means is the company is teaching us how to think about other people, how to treat each other, how to think about customers, what morality is. So companies are shifting and changing consciousness. They're probably not aware that they're doing it. They might be if they're big enough and they're thinking about company culture and investing in company culture. And so imagine a world where we're shifting that consciousness, right? Another way to think about this is in management. If I could change one thing, I would give every worker a better manager, right? There's 3.3 billion workers in the world, which means there's give or take 600 to 800 million managers. Our single biggest factor in how we think about work, our relationship with work, is with our manager. And how we think about work, our relationship with work, is the second biggest factor in our overall life satisfaction, second only to our mental well-being. Which means that our overall life satisfaction, our relationship with our manager, for most people, is probably the single most relationship for them in their entire life.
Yeah, it's
Now,
crazy.
here's another thing. The average time that a manager gets manager training or leadership training is approximately 5 to 10 years, surveys vary, 5 to 10 years after they've become a manager,
Hmm.
right? So if we could do one thing, it would be to give people leadership training on how to be more empathetic and why it's good for business, why it's going to be good for their career too.
Yeah. Well, I know I can't keep going because I know Tom, and I'm sure he's going to want to jump in because Tom only has a bazillion years of deep experience in this. So, Tom, any thoughts? What's up for you?
Yeah, lots of thoughts, and thank you for the acknowledgement, Carson. I guess a couple of things. So, in the work I've been doing in conscious leadership over the last 15 years, whenever I'm doing retreats or talks, and colleagues of mine around the world in the same space will ask an audience, if you look at the evolution of the human species, where are we on the consciousness path? And consistently worldwide, what we collectively have heard is that humanity's at our adolescent stage of our evolution towards becoming more conscious. And we can see it in our systems, we can see it in how we work with each other. And so I love the work that you're doing, Scott, in that you're helping to facilitate, because to your point, 8 billion people on the planet, 3.3 billion are in the workplace. What a great point of leverage for helping to move human evolution along. And there's a lot of questions I have, but one question in particular I have is, so we look over the last couple of decades from a scientific, medical studies, et cetera, on PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Most of that focus has been on veterans coming out of places of conflict, war settings, and it's focused on the psychological and the physical impacts of war. But what we're starting to see emerge is more realization around moral PTSD. And you were speaking to the workplace where people are self-selecting out or being self-selected in because they can belong. But what we're starting to see in the workplace is more attention being paid, and I think a lot more attention needing to be paid to moral PTSD that people encounter in the workplace. And so I'm wondering, when you talk about manager training and the work environment, if there's anything there you'd like to speak to.
Sure. I think when we train managers, again, we're meeting people where they are,
Mhm.
right? And if we can just get some of the basics in, right? Because there's a spectrum. Some of the basics meaning, how do I connect with my employees, right? How do I create an environment where they can do their best? Because when employees do their best, then as a manager, that's good for me. As a company, that's good for me. The single biggest factor in creating a high-performing team, we know from Google's work on Project Aristotle 7-10 years ago, is psychological safety. And it makes sense because we're a human animal. We're Homo sapien first. And every single response or reaction we have to the world is animal first. It's survival first. And so when we go to a work environment where we typically have this shield up, we're protecting ourselves. And so when we're in protection mode, we're not creative as we could be. So as a manager, if we can create an environment which allows people to feel secure, to feel trusted and trust of the rest of the team, then they can do their best. Even this one thing can make a huge difference in, setting a manager on a course that allows them to then get better. right? From that point, I want to create a psychologically safe environment. Then they can learn about empathy, which empathy then leads towards compassion, and all the things that come with it. But we start simply, right? There's overwhelm in the world, right? As Jim started, there's overwhelm, but we start with something really simple. How do I create an environment where my employees can do their best, where they can feel safe and free? And from there, goodness happens.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I appreciate you referencing the importance of psychological safety before there could be trust in the environment and relationships. And it all starts from my work experience with that, creating that sense of safety that I, as an employee, I'm seen for who I am, all of me. I'm heard for what I have to contribute, and I'm appreciated. And that, those seemingly simple things are what I often see managers just aren't trained to do, or have been given the opportunity to learn about the importance of that safety before the trust can be established and created across the organization.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. Tom, anything else, or can I jump back in?
Yep, jump back in.
Okay. So Scott, tell us about the book, the actual book. Tell us what led you. I mean, we have the beginnings of a glimpse of maybe some of your motivations, but I know there's some great stories around the genesis of how that book came to be, and just some of your thinking about that. But
Sure.
Unpack that for us a bit.
Well, in the moment that I was wanted to bring into the world, I had this role. I was head of mindfulness and compassion programs at LinkedIn. And I would often get the question, like, what does that even mean? What does it mean to be compassionate at work? What is your job? Like, what are you trying to do? And so partly the book was in response to that, to have something out there. And always I wanted to build things at LinkedIn, not only for our 15,000 employees, but things that we would bring to the rest of the world. So anyway, I started, well, an event to back up a little bit. I was coming home from an event with Soren Gordhammer, who leads Wisdom 2.0. We did a joint event, and this was December of 19. And we're driving in the car, and he gets this funny look, and he looks over at me. I'm in the passenger seat, and he says, "The universe has told me to tell you it's time to write your book." And we both laughed, But then I kind of got quiet and I checked in. I'm like, yeah, it is. It feels right. I've been thinking about writing a book for 30 years, and it finally was ripe. And so long story short, I found I had all these stories, but I didn't know how to put them together. When I do speaking events, I had all these stories. I found an editor, we created an outline, and then I was ready to go. And I started writing April 1st of 2020. Well, remember where we were in April of 2020. We'd all been sent home. And so I turned commuting time into writing time and finished in basically 10 weeks. And then the book came out a year later. And it's essentially the stories from my life, stories from work, that are all about increasing self-awareness. Right? They're all about increasing ability to have compassion. Because what I realized when I set out to write, I told you my definition: the capacity to be aware of others, a mindset of kindness, and the courage to take action. But what I really realized is our ability to do that, 99% of it is our ability to do that for ourselves. It's about our own self-development. And our own self-development essentially follows the same path. Right? What's our level of self-awareness? Am I aware of myself? Do I have a mindset of kindness towards myself, or do I love myself? And then third is, do I have the courage to take action? Now think about it for ourselves. When I know the answer, I know what's right, do I actually do it? Do I actually have the courage to do what's hard for me? And when I do all those, I'm developing into someone that can then be aware of someone else. Right? So the book is fun. It's a good read. It won an award, blah, blah, blah. But I wanted to write something that wasn't a boring business book, because I hate boring business books. And I wanted it to be something that people would actually read. And so because of who I have been in the world, I worked at LinkedIn, I've been an executive, I actually get people to read it. And that's part of the journey. That's half the battle.
That's great. Well, it's a good part of it. And how's the reception been? And any, fun anecdotal stories that have come up, crossing paths with people who've read it. Just curious to know about how it's gone into the world.
It's funny. People who read it enjoy it. What I would say is COVID was a tough time to be an author in terms of selling books.
Yeah.
So I've had to change my relationship with the book as it's not about how many copies sold, it's about the impact of, what it is. And so it's been fantastic. A funny story, I was doing a speaking gig for a sales leadership conference, right? I was on the East Coast. I'm a West Coast guy. And if this thing was in Disney World, I guess is the one. We had the meet and greet the night before. It was going to be for 200 senior directors and above for this tech company on the East Coast. And I went to the meet and greet, and everybody is like my age or older, mostly white dudes, in a jacket, with a button-down shirt. And I'm California casual. And I was looking around thinking, oh man, is my stuff going to play here? Like, because I had the keynote and then I had also a workshop in the afternoon. And I decided I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to stick to my plan. So I gave my talk, which included a 6-minute meditation for these very, in my opinion, button-down folks compared to me. And people were engaged. They came to my workshop. They were engaged again. And later that night, we were on the bus to dinner. We were in Disney World, so we took a bus somewhere, right? And I sat down. I don't know anybody. They know each other, and this guy sat down next to me, and he says, "All right." He goes, "You got me." And I said, "Yeah? What? Tell me." He goes, "Well, when they introduced you, I thought, oh my God, oh geez, this is going to be such a load of, and he says, but I listened and you've got some fun stories. And then I went to your workshop and I got to tell you, man, I'm all in. I am all in." And I thought, that's it. That's why we do it.
Huge. That's big. If you can swing that and hit that ball, that's awesome. Has the book been more, do you have a sense of where the more copies are being sold? Is it West Coast? Is it East Coast? Is it in the middle? Is it, who knows? They're just
the ones that are being sold are the ones I sell, right? When somebody invites me to a speaking event, I'm like, hey, you want to buy a couple $100 for your employees?
Yeah. Nice. That's great.
So just as an aside, in today's world that is just literally flooded with content, including books, no publisher sells your book for you. I have to sell every single one. So
yeah.
Well, there you go. If you want to buy my book, it's called The Full Body Yes.
Yeah, it's a great book. I've read it, and it's really very good. And as a former book publisher in a former life, I totally get it. Today's marketplace is a bit challenging, so I kind of curious about the publishing nerd side of me comes out and asks about those kinds of things. But in terms of the broader message, I mean, it's been amazing. How long ago did you leave LinkedIn at this point? And there was a question earlier about, what was the final, straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, when you chose to leave? Like, not that it was a breaking thing, but, what was the final element that had you move on?
Well, so it's been almost 3 years, September, 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I had taken some time off when my book came out to try to help the book in the world. And so I'd taken 3 months off and I was doing speaking events and I was kind of had this taste of being a free range chicken, And so when I came back to work, on the second day, I spent 5.5 hours in a staff meeting that had nothing to do with me, like literally nothing. I tried to make it have nothing. And so I did not have the full body yes about being back at work. So I was trying to figure it out. I'm like, I believed that the title, Head of Mindfulness and Compassion at LinkedIn, was helping me, because I really wanted to be out in the world and help basically have a bigger audience than the 15,000 people of LinkedIn, the 3.3 billion. And so I knew I needed to get out there, but I wasn't sure about it. And the world of LinkedIn had changed. New CEO, new head of L&D, new head of HR, and it was COVID time. We were just trying to figure out, the company was trying to figure out how to keep things moving. And honestly, people had kind of forgotten why I was in the role in the first place. So
Hmm.
the energy for what I was doing had shifted.
Hmm.
And it was just time. It was
It's
time
time
for
to
the
move.
conversation to
Yeah.
go on.
Well, for those in the audience that are listening, don't know, Scott, you are also technically a co-founder of the Inner MBA, or tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
that. Like deeply involved at the very
Yeah, yeah,
least.
yeah.
So just unpack that a little bit, and maybe tell folks about that
Sure.
program.
Sure. So about 4-ish years ago, myself from LinkedIn, Tammy Simon from Sounds True, and Soren from Wisdom 2.0 got together. It was Tammy's idea, so she holds most of the water for this.
Hmm.
She wanted to create the Inner MBA with this idea that we have all these structured learning programs for what I'll call the technical part of our jobs at work.
Hmm.
Even an MBA or a master's in engineering, whatever, all the technical parts, but no one was really doing a deep dive on the inner part of what we need to do as a leader. So she had this idea that, hey, if Sounds True partners with LinkedIn, Sounds True has been basically her theme has been bring spiritual wisdom to the masses. That's not quite the right words, but
Sure.
that's the ethos. And LinkedIn's all about business. So how do you combine the two? And then Wisdom 2.0 is about conferences and bringing people together in the world of consciousness and business together as well. And so it was founded, and I think that, let's see, should be the fourth cohort of people starting in September, I believe,
Hmm.
with the
Hmm.
Inner MBA. So I'm a faculty member and a founder and still pretty involved, even though I'm no longer at LinkedIn.
Yeah, sure. So tell us just a little bit more about the Inner MBA. Not
Yeah,
that we need to spend a lot of time there, but
sure.
I think a lot of listeners who are listening might really find that to be very interesting and helpful.
Sure. I believe it's a 9-month program that goes from September to May, just like school. And there's a variety of teachers that you've probably heard of before. You can go to their website and check it out. If you just search on Sounds True Inner MBA, you'll get there. You're also, I think one of the most important parts is you're placed with a cohort of other people going through the same experience. And for me, that's where the magic happens. Um, I talked to some people and they're like, "Oh, it was great." And they participated with their cohort. And some people are like, "Oh, yeah, I kind of like I did my own thing, but I ended up not doing it." Like, "Well, how was your cohort?" Like, "Oh, I never went to my cohort." Like, "Oh, well, that's the difference, right?" As humans, one of the things I've really come to know, especially with all this online learning stuff, is we are group learning creatures, right? From satsang and sangha and preschool and Bible study and everything else. Like, yes, we need our own time to digest, but we learn in groups. And if we cut out that group learning part, we don't get the full benefit of it. So
Mhm.
anyway, 9 months of lectures, of not quite lectures, that's not the right word for it, discussions, um, cohort learning, self-paced learning, group events, all with the goal of making each one of us a more conscious leader.
That's cool. And for those also of you who don't know, and I know just a tiny little bit, Inner MBA and Ubiquity University, which is of course the host of this podcast that we're on right now, there's a partnership there that allows people who have the Inner MBA to do even further work, as I understand it, to turn it into an MA itself, and or even further, I think, into a PhD as well. I'm not entirely sure. I just put the link in the chat for those that are interested. Great work. Your impact has been incredible so far, just in terms of what you've, at least what I've seen you've been doing. It's been tremendous. Random note or random question. Are you still in touch with Jeff Weiner, who's the former CEO of LinkedIn that you mentioned earlier, who gave the speech at Wharton, et cetera?
A little bit. So Jeff
Mhm.
has moved on to do other things. I think that I would let him tell his own story, but I think
Sure,
he's
of course.
primary focus as the chairman of LinkedIn and also working on some environmental projects.
Okay, very good. I didn't know what he was up to. I knew he had
Yeah.
kind of kept some of that going. Tom, anything for you? Otherwise, I have more questions for
Yeah,
Scott.
I'd love to jump into the book a bit more. You've titled it "Full Body Yes," and when we look at the most workplaces, at least in the in the intellectual economy and the service economy, what's valued, what's appreciated is the skull brain. And coming out of academia, what's appreciated and valued is the skull brain. And it ignores the rest of what it means to be human. And so when you talk about a full body yes, you're making a request, or there's an invitation for people to be attached to the rest of this thing we call a body and get beyond the skull brain. So we know from a neuroscience perspective that we've got the vagus nerve that connects the skull brain to our emotional brain, the heart, and to our gut, our intuitive brain. And so love to have you talk a bit more about how do we help people appreciate and understand they have a full body, and there's a lot of wisdom there.
Sure. Well, I tell a lot of stories that lead to it, but let's try an experience. How about that? So we'll just do something for 90 seconds. So everybody think about a decision you're trying to make, and maybe you've been trying to make it with your brain, but you need to have let's call it an A and a B, right? And it could be something really big, like I have these two job offers. Should I take A and B? Or should I leave my spouse, A or B? Or something more simple, like whatever. But pick something now and make it clear what your A and your B is. All right, everybody got it? All right, now just, if you would, close your eyes and let's do a little practice. First, just settle in, take a breath. And now imagine that you have chosen A. Whatever it was, you chose A. And just get a sense of how that feels. What is it like to have chosen A? How does it feel in your body? Maybe play it forward a little bit. You've chosen A. What does your life look like over the next week or year or lifetime? Because you're a person who has A in their life. And just really get a sense of what it's like to be with this choice and have this in your life. All right, take another deep breath in. Maybe think of something very different, like think about an orange rhinoceros. Bring an orange rhinoceros to your mind. It's just a palate cleanser. And then now bring to your world the fact that you have chosen B. What is it like if you've chosen B? And let it roll around, maybe move forward a little bit in your life. Imagine what this choice will mean for you over the next week or month. A lifetime, looking back, you have chosen B. This is who you are. And just notice how it feels in your body. Maybe notice where you feel it in your body. And when you're ready, just return back to here, back to us, back to our conversation. And I guess I'd ask Tom. Tom, did you play along?
I did play along, and the orange rhino was wanting something to eat.
And I guess I'd ask, did you get any more information? You know, was the choice between A and B any more clear than it was before?
Yeah. I mean, all joking aside, what I experienced was, what I would equate to a full body yes on A, in terms of how my body felt, the sensations, the sort of the lightness of being that I was experiencing, versus B. I felt in the research of Jill Bolte Taylor, this prefrontal cortex, which is the home of our spiritual brain. I felt that closing down. I felt sort of a heaviness in my body with option B.
Yeah. Look, it doesn't work every time, but for me, I get some information every time. Right? And I'll go back to it. And here's what often happens is that I'll feel completely at ease with one of the choices. Let's call it A. Like, okay, I know I need to do A. And then the mind immediately is like, oh, whoa, whoa, hey, yeah, but. The yeah, but mind comes in. And it's an opportunity to really go within and say, all right, well, clearly the mind has some information, but also whatever the rest of it is has information too. And if I can use all of it, then that is very powerful. Let me take it one step further. So like I mentioned, everything I talk about at work is totally secular. So I do things like this that are about the body. But I'll tell a story. I mentioned the orange rhino. It's on the cover of my book. It's also the signature story of my book. But I'll tell you why. In case you don't want to buy it, here you go. Here's a good story from the book. I was in my operations job, and my number one lieutenant, if you want to call it that, he was leaving to take another role. It was all good. He was getting promoted in a sideways role. And I needed to replace him. And it was the biggest hire of my career because I knew that whoever was going to be in this new role would kind of make or break our team, would make or break me and my career as well, because it was the thing that was most tied to the rest of the company. So I felt the weight of this decision. And we had gotten down to 2 candidates. We'd done, 10 rounds of interviews. We have 2 candidates. There's no more mind or brain information to get. We had one candidate who was from the outside and one candidate who was from the inside, my A and B. And I was doing this exercise that we just did. But I also wanted to go deeper. I was in contemplation one day with whatever you want to call it, with the divine, with the universe, with God, with the deepest part of myself. And I said, okay, you know what? I don't usually do this, but this time I want a sign. I want a no doubt secret handshake from the universe sign. So I'm in contemplation. I said, okay, if it's person A, I'm going to see, and it was this Indian woman with long dark hair. And so I was imagining her and kind of what would I see? I'm like, okay, I'm going to see long dark hair with a butterfly pinned in it in a knot in the back. Like, okay, that's really specific. And if it's person B, this person had an orange backpack that they carried to work. I'm going to see an orange rhinoceros. And immediately my mind is like, what are you doing? You're never going to. I'm like, nah, that's what I came up with. And I'm like, all right, next 24 hours, let's go. And so I had my 2 signs. I turned it over. I let it go. I didn't think about it anymore. The next day, it's a Friday afternoon. We took our team to the movies. One of the Star Wars movies was coming out. It was new at the time. And I'm sitting there late Friday afternoon, just kind of letting the stress of the week let go of me, eating my popcorn, talking to my seatmate. And there's a preview for an animated movie. And across the screen rolls an orange rhinoceros. And I stopped. I'm like, oh my God. I started laughing. And immediately the mind jumped in. The mind is like, well, was it really orange or was it like maroonish orange, I'm like, no. But then I realized, like, okay, I got my sign, but this is real life. This is my life. This is high stakes. It's also these other 2 people's lives and all of the things that's going to happen. This is real. It's not just whatever, throwaway thing. And I checked and like, okay, I'm going to give this job to person B. Does that feel right? And it did. And so with all that information, with the mental information, look, they both would have been great. We did all the interviews. We did all the things. They had great backgrounds. But person B crushed it. So that's an example of really the full body, including the spiritual body, what I would throw in there as well.
I love that story.
And it's not the way that we're oriented. It's not the way we're trained in business to access that information beyond the skull brain. And so I'd love to hear more about what your journey's like and how you bring leaders along in terms of developing their self-awareness. Because I can imagine there's a lot of resistance, hopefully a lot of curiosity, but what's your experience of bringing folks along on their
Sure.
self-awareness journey?
Well, we start with things that are really familiar to them, right? We start with as an example, a 360 at work. If you've never done a 360, it's when you get information, you get an interview or somebody fills out a form from your boss, from your peer group, from people that report to you, and the more the better. And that is sometimes very shocking because other people experience me very differently than I experience me. And so this is a beautiful way to start to build self-awareness. It's like, how do I show up in the world? We'll often pair that with some sort of assessment. In the old days, it was Myers-Briggs or the AVA, or, I've taken 15 or 20 of these things. Currently, I love the Enneagram. For me, I found it super powerful. You take a 20 or 30-minute test, you get back a 30-page report. My wife read mine and loved it so much that she took one too. And it was really so good for our relationship together, my relationship with people at work. And all of it leads to, we're talking about self-awareness. So I think these things are nice, comfortable places to start at work that crack people open, that get them on the path of like, oh, people see me differently than I see myself, which is sometimes an extraordinary revelation. Or with the Enneagram, it's like, oh, I show up to people in a different way. But what I love about the Enneagram, it talks about, why do I do that? Why do I behave in a way that then shows up in this other way? But then here's the thing. In the Enneagram, there are 9 archetypes. You're given a number. I'm a 7. And so once I realized that I'm a 7, and maybe Tom is a 5 and Carson's a 1, or whatever the numbers are, it doesn't matter. I realized that we're all the same but different. And I can start to build the seeds of compassion. Mindfulness or self-awareness is my own journey. It's what happens with my own development. But that all allows me to then be more aware of others, which is the compassion part. Right? So I need both pieces. I need the development part and then the awareness of others. So I think these 2 tools are a good start. Then through coaching, or then through other techniques that we have, or then through, for me, like when I do coaching, I like to have a discussion about their own self-awareness. Like, what's their strategy for building their own self-awareness? And sometimes you get blank stares. Sometimes you get a long list of what people are doing. But that's a good starting place. And then there are, hundreds of things we do after that to help.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And when the work I've done with 360 in particular, but beyond that, oftentimes when folks see their results because of their training, their background, their orientation, they immediately go to the areas that are weaker with the assumption, oh, I've got to fix those, and not look at the strengths and where am I strong and how do I make my strengths stronger, and find workarounds for the areas where they're weaker. And that's I find that oftentimes is a challenge because of the way that we're trained.
And I teach about that too. So one of the things I teach about is we're animals. We're Homo sapiens. And when we can really see ourselves as animals first, we can really start to understand our behavior, and that there's not anything wrong with us. It's just how we are. It's how we're programmed. So as an example, just like you said, we focus on the negative. As humans, we have a negativity bias, right? We started this call by talking about all the things that are wrong in the world. It's just what we do, right? Why? It's because our amygdala, the physical part of our brain, is programmed to keep us alive. It's programmed to look at all the dangers. That's how we stayed alive. So it shows up in every single thing that we do. So when we give somebody a 360, we give somebody an Enneagram, they focus on the negatives, it's a chance to talk about negativity bias. It's a chance to talk about our animal instinct. And to then see how in every part of their life, they're reacting with the negative first. Right? Think about your primary relationship, your spouse, your kid, your mom, whoever it is. Oftentimes I call it pothole management. We're thinking about the potholes in our road of life, right? So my son, when he was 15 or whatever, he's 26 now, I was so frustrated because every Wednesday night, it was the night where you take out the trash. And it was conflict every Wednesday night. To the point that I would do it half the time just because it was easier than the conflict. And I was fixated on why can't you just take out the trash instead of the 99 other reasons why I love him and why it's great. So this idea, every one of these moments is a learning opportunity. And if we can frame it in the right way, we can start to give leaders a bigger palette to paint with, right? And realize that their canvas is much bigger than they started.
Yeah, thank you for that, and appreciate the insights and the personal stories. Anything else on the content of the book itself? I know we don't want to give away too much because we would want folks to buy it and read it and use it. But anything else in terms of the whole idea of shifting our orientation towards how we show up?
Yeah, I would say I've shared the model, the model of compassion, the model of our own development. The book loosely follows that train, right? It's nonlinear in that the stories are grouped together to build a point, whether it's self-awareness or compassion or just being aware of others. And they're fun. It's a good time. And I guess the biggest thing I would say is my hope is that, look, this book is not about me, it's about us. And when you read it, when you read anything, whether it's my book or something else, when we see ourselves in another person, this is when we lose that duality, right? And we can really become more of a non-dual force. And so I hope that if you do read it, I hope that you see yourself in it. And I also hope you reach out to me afterwards to say hi, or if there's a story you liked or didn't like. I'd love to hear from you.
Well, I'll say that it's a great book, and I'm not just saying that because I love Scott, which he knows I do, but the book is fun. He said it's a good time. It's true. Some of the stories that come through it are quite frankly hilarious, and it builds very nicely. So you should read it regardless. There's nothing to be given away. You should just buy it and read it. So Tom, do you mind if I continue, or do you have anything else? Are you good?
Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
So I'd like to just turn our attention. We have maybe just 10 minutes or so left. Curious to know more about changing work. And, we were talking about earlier, obviously, this book that's coming forward on the self-aware leader. I didn't know that. I had being a part of the changing work community myself, I've seen, announcements about it and so forth, and understood that it was written by a number of different people. But what a brilliant frame in the sense of just here, 25, I think you said, people
25.
are just,
25.
offering their own experience on how they became a conscious leader or more self-aware leader. Is
Not
that
even that's selling it too much.
okay?
So every person has 2,000 words to talk about an experience of how they increase their self-awareness.
I see.
So we're not saying, oh, look at me, I'm a conscious leader. We're just saying, look, I'm on the journey just like you are.
Yeah, great.
And here's an experience where I got it wrong and learned
Right.
something about myself. Or here's an experience where I maybe got it right. Or here's an experience that life brought me to my knees and it helped me realize something new.
Yeah, beautiful.
Like we're not saying we have the answers, like the Quakers. We're saying we have questions.
Yeah.
And we're on the journey with you. And maybe if you read my story or read one of these stories, you'll see yourself there and be inspired to take one more step, or be inspired to go, yeah, me too. I experienced life that way too. So
It's a great, big
we're
invitation.
writing this first book. It comes out September 20th. We're also kicking off the next book. So if you want to write a book with us, come join us, right? We have 25 spots. The next book will be on other awareness. We won't market it like that, but it's essentially the same deal. What's an experience I had that allowed me to be more aware of other people? And yeah,
Cool.
it should be fun.
And what's the third book about?
I don't know yet.
Cool.
We'll see what's alive in that moment.
Exactly. That's great.
Right? We may have, I think these first two topics are another way of saying mindfulness and compassion.
Yeah.
Right? Self-awareness is another way of saying mindfulness. Other awareness is a way of saying compassion. We could write the next bazillion books about those two topics and just find
Sure.
different ways to market them and talk about them.
Yeah,
So
for sure. Yeah, that's awesome. And just tell us just a little bit more about the collective itself. So how many folks are a part of it now? The numbers were growing very quickly, I remember.
Yeah. We started, as I mentioned, with practitioners, coaches, and consultants. We have somewhere between 600 and something people in our community.
Wonderful. Amazing.
Over the next We'd love everybody to join, and we're trying to build things that would make it relevant for the everybody. Right now, it's mostly for coaches and consultants. We're in the process of now building a community for employees. You could think of it like an ERG, an employee resource group for people interested in all the things that they're not quite getting from their own company. And also for leaders, a place to go if you're a conscious leader. We're in the middle of it. As an entrepreneur, if any of you are entrepreneurs, it is a journey, and sometimes it's a painful journey. And so we're in the middle of like birthing this thing, and it's hard.
Yeah.
One of the things we're considering, probably like 99% considering, is to become a nonprofit. Because the ethos of that, the energy of that for me makes a lot more sense than like, hey, come join my startup.
Yeah.
We want it to be a movement, and so we're going to make it a nonprofit. And also what I'd say is we have way more ambition than we have resources for. And so if you'd love to come and be part of it and volunteer or lead part of it, we need all the help we can get. Or if you just like the idea and you want to donate, we'll figure out how to take your donation and make the world a slightly better place than the day before.
That's awesome. So fast forward, you wave a wand, it's 10 years from now. What is the collective? And I know this is a big question, and you basically just answered it a few moments ago saying, hey, we're kind of figuring it out as we go. But if it were, Scott's world and Scott was the all reigning entity, what would it look like?
Oh, that's a totally different story. Oh, wow. So when I think about what I want, some people ask, like, what's the end game for this? For me, it's about consciousness. And sometimes consciousness and the outer world don't line up, if that makes sense. Right? Tom was talking about the evolution of humanity. I might talk about the evolution of consciousness. I would say that each one of us, this is as evolved as we've ever been, right? I happen to believe in karma and reincarnation. This is as evolved as we've ever been. So in the history of our own evolution, this is it. We're at the peak of evolution. That does not mean that we're at the peak of world safety or how we treat each other or the life events. They are somewhat disconnected, or they can be, right? Because I believe in balance, right? The higher we go, the bigger the challenges that exist in the world. That's kind of the point, right? To learn how to love. And so I go back to my Rumi quote. Yesterday I was clever and I tried to change the world. Today I'm wise and I'm working on myself. So what I'm really interested in is, will everyone pick up the journey of their own self-awareness? Will they individually each become more self-aware? Now, in the world of work, so that's for me the biggest goal. But in the world of work, the things I'd like to see are, imagine a world where we all know the code. We know that everybody, it's just common knowledge that psychological safety is the -- factor in building a high-performing team. What if every shareholder knew the code that to make more money, leaders need to be more compassionate, that we need to solve for the whole instead of just the shareholder? And what if they knew that to such an extent that shareholders would take action against CEOs and CFOs that don't behave in this way, right? It's like, oh, you're only fixated on profit. You need to be fixated on creating a great environment, providing more value for customers, because that's how I'm going to make more money.
Yeah.
What if that was the case, right?
Yeah.
What if it was the case that we're not having conversations about all the dumb things at work? We're not having conversation about sexual discrimination or any type of discrimination, right? We're not talking about, I saw the comments, why there's not more women in positions of leadership, why there's blah, 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 all the things. We're not even talking about them because they have disappeared. We're not talking about they're not a problem.
Yeah.
That's where I want to get to.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I would add to, it's so similar to, the work that Compassion 2.0 is doing to scale compassion and to do so in a way where humanity, and I'm just going to restate what I'm hearing you say in just my different frame, a complementary frame, hopefully, is that we've lived in this world where we've had everything so compartmentalized historically, right? We had our families, we went to work, we went to our spiritual community, typically a church, or in the West, typically a church or synagogue or what have you. And the world is changing so much now. And from from a sense of from our own evolution, our own next advances in consciousness, we're, I think, inhabiting a space more of just humanity. And humanity expresses itself in the need to generate value and income, to cover these bodies with clothes and to feed and to have medicines and houses and so forth. The embodiment, requires an economic frame, but it doesn't necessarily take us out of we don't need to leave our humanity in order to do that, nor compartmentalize ourselves in order to do that. And I think that's probably a different way of saying what you're saying. So it's a great vision. It's wonderful. Do you have something else you want to add? I could. No, I thought you were going to speak to something.
Me or Tom? Sorry, I was trying to read the comments.
Specifically, I apologize. I'm not being clear. I thought you were going to add something. If not, it's no problem, because my next question would be, how do people get involved? How do they get involved with changing work outside of volunteering and donating and so forth? Like, is it just as simple going to the website and checking it out?
Yeah, come to changingwork.org, changingwork.org. If you need some specific instructions or you want to connect, I'm at scott@changingwork.org or scott@scottshute.com. Either one works. And we'll get you connected.
Cool. Tom, anything for you before we sign off?
Bring Jim back in? A couple of things, and thanks for sharing your contact details, Scott. We saw a number of chats. Folks are wanting to know how to get in touch with you. If we take a historical perspective for a moment, the whole idea of a job is relatively new. I mean, humanity's been around as a species for about 240,000 years, and the thing called the job has been around for a couple of centuries. So changing work has been changing for as long as humanity has existed, mostly because of technological advances. And the nature of work, the nature of job is evolving. And what I like about this conversation and what you're describing is, how do we intentionally change the nature of work? How do we intentionally change the nature of a job? I mean, jobs, every 3 to 5 years, 60% plus of jobs go away because of changes in org structure, technology, et cetera. But I really appreciate the, being more intentional about work.
Sure. I think that for me, it starts from the inside out. That's why my book is called Change Your Work and World from the Inside Out. That's why changing work is change work from the inside out. Because it all starts with consciousness.
Yep.
The world is a dynamic place. The problems that we have right now are going to be different than the problems we have 10 years from now or 10 minutes from now. We can't predict. We try to control all the time. We can't predict. Consciousness is the only thing, right? So when we're working with individuals, when we're working with leaders, how do we create this idea that it's the most important job I have on this planet is developing myself? Because then I can address the problems of the world, whether it's housing or non-equality or whatever the things are. It starts with each one of us and our own level of consciousness. Because that allows me to then, as a leader, influence things where they're going. It allows me as an individual to deal with whatever comes at me in a more not appropriate, in a better way, one that's going to allow me for more joy and more, success, both inwards and outwards. So while we have our eye on the bigger changes, whether it's societal or work or any of those things, the most important thing is it starts inwardly, each one of our journeys. And if we can help others, light that flame for their journey as well, the other stuff will come.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think with that comment, we'll bring Jim back into the conversation to close out today's program. But really excited about you being with us today, Scott, to help kick off this week.
Thanks, Scott, thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's out there. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Carson. Thank you, Scott. This has been a fascinating conversation and insights. Just two quick comments, Scott, and then a question. The first is thank you for mentioning the inner MBA. That's one of the most enjoyable programs and partnerships we have at Ubiquity University with Sounds True. Tammy is an old friend, and she does extraordinary work there at Sounds True. And I'm delighted to hear that you were one of the founders. It's a very important program. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank you for it. The second comment is I'm really intrigued at your notion of work as the new religion and the centrality of work. It's a very Marxist thing to say, because you remember Karl Marx agreed with you. He the very basis of his Marxist philosophy was the nobility of work, that what people do with most of their time is where they're expressing who they most essentially are, and that the entire political economy in an optimal way is that worker's paradise. That if the economy was motivated, he said, not about the accumulation of capital, where you manipulate work and you subordinate work to other goals, but you make work the principal goal in and of itself, that would bring into human existence a quality of both personal endeavor, but also collective caring, that would bring in a whole new way of being in the world. So I don't know how much Marx you've read, but you were sounding very Marxist.
So, not a Marxist, not a wannabe Marxist. Don't know anything about Marxism, to be clear. So, and I don't, what I mean is, I'm not looking for work to replace religions or spiritual paths or to be
No,
the
no, no. I
religion.
know. I understood that.
I'm just indicating that we spend a lot of time there. It can be a beautiful thing. It can be.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And that was one of the points that I think is worth considering in the chat. And this was the Marxist critique, and I think something that should be brought in, because when one starts to focus on work, or as we say, people, planet, and profit, what we're basically shifting is away from the capitalist economic imperative around the supremacy of capital, and we begin this process of prioritizing other human values that are not denominated in money. The environment, family, personal welfare, and human flourishing, as you're expressing it today, compassion. And what is compassion? If that was the central organizing principle of our political economy, our whole world would fundamentally shift. And it's within this context that I wanted to ask you to further elaborate on Tom's point about moral PTSD. I think that is one of the most important issues in the workplace. It's one thing to talk about compassion and flourishing in terms of team building. It's a whole other thing to take that ethos of consciousness into actions that will actually change the behavior of the company itself in the larger world. And I think it's around that traction point where there has yet to be the kind of stellar successes that are really changing the game. There have been a few companies like Interface or some of the smaller, sporting companies and outdoor companies that have really uh, taken up that third challenge of yours to actually have the courage to make a difference. But I think that this is, as I've been tracking it and speaking with people who are seeking to be conscious in a company like Google or Facebook, etc., they suffer increasing moral PTSD in the workplace as the elevation of their consciousness begins to rub against the actual behavior of the company, which, because it's prioritized around capital, everything that they were doing is actually ending up more as image management than actual behavioral changes. And, that's why I was intrigued at what you were saying about LinkedIn, because I think all of us that were paying attention anyway were really intrigued. Here you have this CEO talking about compassion, talking about loving one another, and everybody, he was doing interviews and da 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 da. And now you're reporting that 3 years in, the CEO had changed, the company wasn't really interested. And so you went through, as I'm perceiving it, moral PTSD in a company that you originally, when the ethos was being changed from the top down, the company actually didn't change much. And then you had to make a decision whether you wanted to leave or you wanted to stay, and you chose to leave. And I wanted to bring this up because my experience of people like you and like Tom and Carson and others is that at some point there's a fork in the road between the consciousness that you're cultivating and the company who actually, in the end, isn't that interested in really changing in a way that is required. And I just saw a documentary on interface, and it took that CEO pounding away over years to get the company to actually change in a way. And they went through all kinds of vicissitudes financially and economically, but he wouldn't let go. And is one of the few, I think, heroes of your own definition of compassion. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that in terms of some of these complexities around moral PTSD and your own experience at LinkedIn, which is so replicated out there among people who genuinely
I
seek to
mean,
change their consciousness and the consciousness of others. Just
so for
whatever
sure.
comment you'd like to make. And also you, Carson and Tom, because you're in that field, as we all are.
So for sure it's true. For sure it's a choice for each one of us where we want to spend our time and talents and treasure. There will always be a wave of the other thing, right? What we're talking about is the tip of the spear in consciousness. We're talking about a very um, interesting conversation that 99% of the world is probably not interested in. And so whether it's trying to be an environmentalist when it feels like the wave of change is so far against us, whether it's trying to think about education reform when it seems like it's against us, whether it's time looking at work when it looks like it's against us. It's a choice for each one of us. So I had an experience when I was 18. I was in contemplation and I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. And I had a choice. It felt like at the time a black or white choice. I was either going to get an engineering degree and join the workforce, or I was going to follow my spiritual bliss and do music and move to Broadway or whatever. And I didn't know what to do. And so kind of like the A-B, I was in conversation with the divine, and I got what I called the full body yes. And the message was, maybe you can change work from the inside out. I mean, what do I do with that? I'm 17. So I get my engineering degree, I join work, and for 30 years, I toil away at jobs where it didn't feel like I was changing consciousness. Right? I worked for semiconductor companies and networking companies and whatever, and the whole time, like, really? Is it? And the message I kept getting was, yeah, stay where you are. You're good. And I finally, 30 years later, I wake up, I'm at LinkedIn in this position where I can actually change work from the inside out. Now, each one of us has that choice every day. We can shine our light brightly, regardless of the darkness, or we can choose to say, this is too hard. The world is never gonna be utopia, so why even bother? So it's up to each one of us to shine our light, to move the collective attention away from our amygdalas, away from just looking at the negativity all day, every moment of to, hey, there's good stuff going on too. Because when we can shift our light like a lighthouse, then we don't ignore the darkness, but what it does is it gives us strength to deal with the darkness. When we shift our light, it lights other people up to give them more strength to deal with the darkness. To me, that's consciousness, and it happens regardless of the consciousness of the company we work for.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you. Carson, Tom, do you have any comments on this question of the moral PTSD when it rubs up against the corporate imperative?
Sure. I'll have a few things to say, and I can't imagine Tom doesn't. I would say I would echo a lot of what Scott was saying. I think there's something for me in my approach, or I should say what's calling for me is I have a certain amount of gratitude, not a certain amount, a lot of gratitude for a lot of the pain and a lot of the challenge that's been presented to me in context with all of the great benefits of having grown up in Northern California, looking like I do, being able to get to networks of people like I have been able to. And I would say that in the face of that, there is an imperative to be of service at one level, one that I can't back away from. And so to Scott's kind of implied points, I think their leverage point right now is to bring forward consciousness and to do so in a way that can be driven at scale. I mean, that's what Compassion 2.0 is about. And showing for us, at least in the Compassion 2.0 side, we have two primary principles: the science of flourishing, which is to lean into the scientifically validated frameworks of interventions and products and services that understand the amygdala, for instance, like Scott's speaking to, or some of our other neurobiological frames, and how we can work with those very human animal things that we are. And then on the other side is what I call our Trojan horse, which is the ROI of care, namely, what is the return on investment of care-based culture? Because again, as Scott was speaking to earlier, it's good business. It's just that we haven't been measuring it. We've been measuring business and success in an extractive framework, namely ROI of profit, how much are the shareholders getting, forget the stakeholders, but just the shareholders, all of those things, and to your earlier point about the Marxist framework and the notion of humans as resource, earth as resource, all of which are commodity in service to capital, and capital's only effort and mission is to increase itself. And that's absurd. It's just absolutely absurd. And we're destroying our country. We're destroying the earth, not just our country, our planet, environmentally, but socially. And all of the different issues that have come as a result of people feeling with their amygdalas on fire because they're constantly stressed and angry and frustrated and all of these different things. So it's showing up culturally. I'm going off a little too hard. Anyway, point is that moving into an ROI of care framework, we want to demonstrate to the people that don't necessarily see this yet or understand the importance of this yet, that there are mechanisms by which to manage the fact that if you have psychological safety in your organization, you have meaning, you have, to Scott's point, you have managers that actually have a sense of empathy and are trained in a better way, the company or the organization will do better. It's that simple. And to me, it feels like that's that next step, that if we collectively can understand that, first by starting with leaders who can understand that in organizations who can affect change, then maybe we can start to get to some scale points where maybe the dominoes will fall ultimately in the way so that it starts to perpetuate itself. And there are those permissions, first and foremost, again, to what Scott's been speaking to be self-compassionate, which is where everything has to begin. So anyway, sorry. I'll put a bookmark there.
But you're bringing in a really important point, Carson. Thank you. That the data is in. This is not just a good idea that Scott and others have had, that if you act in a more caring way, the company will do better. That's an actual fact. That's
Precisely.
Not a hypothetical or a philosophical speculation. It's an actual fact of business, even in a capital society.
Totally. I mean, we have to make money in a way that makes sense, and it can be in balance. We have to eat. We have bodies, and bodies are located in time, and time requires nourishment and shelter and all these different things. So we can do that in a way that makes sense and it's harmonious, looking to indigenous populations and wisdom. I mean, there's a whole range of different things that are out there for us to do that. We are starting, I'm going to announce, we're starting a Chief Flourishing Officer learning journey to explore exactly what a flourishing framework would look like inside and from a serious business case of what flourishing and compassion look like. So anyway, I'll hopefully be speaking about that more in the future. But Tom, please, I will park my mouth and give you space.
You need to unmute.
I'll take a slightly different tact. Over the last several years on various programs I've done on Humanity Rising, I've had the opportunity and pleasure of having guests like David Suzuki and Jane Goodall and Dr. Sylvia Earle. And when asked, each of them as octogenarians, what gives you hope? And for David, it was very much a sense of, I'm not sure I still have hope. For Jane, it was very much the youth. And for Dr. Earle, she said, now we know. And for me, when I think about this conversation, to your point, Jim, we now know. There's this thing called moral PTSD, which 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we didn't know existed. And there's so much information now that we know that it makes any of these things about looking at or changing the nature of work, looking at changing the nature of organization, purpose. We now have data, we now have information to make informed decisions and to make choices and to shift from shareholder primacy to more of a multi-stakeholder approach to thinking about work, how to prepare managers to be effective managers, how to help and support leaders on being more self-aware. So for me, that's what gives me hope. That's what gives me a sense of what's possible for work in being, if work is the new religion or the home of spirituality and human development and growth. We've got data, we've got information, we've got resources that we haven't had in the past, and I'm incredibly encouraged by that. The books you've written, Scott, and our guests this week, that we can and we will fundamentally shift the nature of work.
Yeah, thank you. And I know we're a little pressed for time, but Scott, I wanted to end on what I think is the really seminal contribution that you're making. This is the first time, at least I've encountered someone who talks about a full body leadership. Oftentimes it's about management or it's about strategy, it's about some kind of intellectual orientation, shall we say, even in terms of, the 7 habits of highly effective people, Stephen Covey, it's about personality and so forth. But what you're bringing in, which I just wanted to salute, you're talking about a full body issue here, ladies and gentlemen, that it's actually our capacity to be fully in who we most essentially are, mentally, emotionally, but also somatically. I mean, that exercise of the orange rhinoceros, you're really leading us, as I went through the process, in a whole body experience. So this whole notion of embodied experience and embodied intuition and embodied leadership, I think in a fundamental way is a real breakthrough in how people need to understand the nature of consciousness. It's not an ephemeral epiphenomenon of the mind or the brain. It's actually at the core of who we are. So as we make decisions and we make our choices, marshaling the totality of who we are, and honoring that wisdom is really key, I think, to both understanding consciousness and also giving people the courage to do what their body then tells them is the correct path. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and honor your work in that regard, and just have any final comment that you would like to make on that, and then maybe Carson or Tom can tee us up for tomorrow. But
Great.
well done, man. Really, really good.
Thank you. Well, I just want to say thank you for all those who have stuck with us through this time. I appreciate your being here and being part of our community. And I just, the plea is, let's each one of us be a beacon of light, to be an ambassador for compassion. And for each one of us, that starts with ourselves. So thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Carson, are you going to tee us up for tomorrow?
Actually, I'm going to turn that one over to Tom. It's a good friend of Tom's, and Tom will be better suited.
Yeah, thank you again, Scott, for joining us. Tomorrow we're joined by a dear friend of mine, Dr. Michael Nagler. Michael, a couple of years ago, wrote the book, The Third Harmony, and he and I had a chance to collaborate on the film, The Third Harmony, where the focus of the book is very much around the true nature of humanity, that we're hardwired for collaboration and cooperation. Compassion is a huge piece of what it means to be human. It's innately who we are, and we have an opportunity to hear from Dr. Nagler about compassion in the context of the Third Harmony.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Carson. Thank you, everyone. That'll bring us to a close for today. Our first of 5 sessions on Compassion 2.0. You are welcome to the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You also received it in your Zoom reminder for today. So that will do it for us. Thank you all so much. See you tomorrow for our second session on Compassion 2.0. Thank you, Carson. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you, Tom.